The rain hammered against the hospital's glass awning like 1,000 tiny drummers, relentless and unforgiving. Zariah Monroe pushed through the automatic doors, her dark green scrubs already heavy with the damp city humidity. 12 hours. 12 hours of back-to-back trauma cases, heart-stopping codes, and the crushing grief of families who expected miracles she couldn't perform. Her feet ached with a bone-deep weariness that pulsed with every heartbeat, and her eyes burned from the fluorescent glare she had worked under since before dawn. Squinting through the cascading sheets of water, Zariah fumbled for her phone. The ride-share app showed a black sedan idling in the pickup zone about 50 feet away. Perfect. All she wanted was to collapse into the back seat, close her eyes, and let someone else navigate this monsoon. She pulled her pink nursing school backpack over her head and sprinted toward the vehicle, her sneakers splashing through puddles that soaked her socks instantly. The car was sleek and predatory, with tinted windows that revealed nothing of its opulent interior. Zariah yanked open the back door and threw herself inside, gasping with relief as the warmth of the heated leather seats enveloped her exhausted body. Thank God, she breathed, settling into an interior that smelled faintly of sandalwood and expensive cedar. You can just take me to the apartment complex on the corner of 5th. She didn't wait for a response, her eyelids already growing impossibly heavy. She barely registered the sharp, angular profile of the man sitting beside her in the shadows. She should have apologized for the intrusion or asked if it was a shared ride, but her body had other plans. Within seconds, the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the roof conspired against her consciousness, and Zariah Monroe was fast asleep. Jae-Hyun Park had not become the Ghost King by being easily surprised. He had survived assassinations and navigated the treacherous underworld of global logistics with a calculating, ruthless hand. But when a woman in green scrubs threw herself into his private car, rattled off an address like he was her personal chauffeur, and promptly fell asleep against his shoulder, he found himself experiencing something dangerously close to bewilderment. He sat perfectly still, his hand frozen halfway to the weapon concealed beneath his tailored black jacket, watching as this stranger's breathing deepened into the rhythm of genuine sleep. In the front seat, his associate went rigid, eyes darting to the rearview mirror, waiting for the signal to dispose of the witness. But Jae-Hyun studied her face in the dim light, the dark circles of exhaustion and the hospital ID badge clipped to her scrubs. She wasn't a threat, she was a healer who had made a very unfortunate mistake. Just drive, Jae-Hyun said quietly in Korean, his unreadable eyes never leaving Zariah's sleeping face. He needed time to assess this impurity that had just stumbled into his lion's den. The silence inside the sedan was absolute, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of the emergency room Zariah had just left. As the car pulled away from the hospital curb, the gentle vibration of the engine acted like a sedative. Zariah's head lulled to the side, eventually coming to rest against the expensive roll of Jae-Hyun's shoulder. She didn't stir when the car hit a minor pothole, nor did she flinch when the tires hissed through a deep pool of standing water. She was sick at dawn, claimed by a level of exhaustion that rendered the world's most dangerous man invisible. In the front seat, the driver's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds. He was waiting for the word, a nod, a hand gesture, told the man to pull into a dark alley and come to find the security bridge. In their world, a stranger in the back seat was a death sentence for a target. But Jae-Hyun Park remained motionless. He looked down at the woman leaning against him. A stray lock of dark hair had escaped her ponytail, resting against the pale skin of her cheek. He could see the faint pulse in her neck, steady and trusting. It was a rhythm he hadn't encountered in years, life that wasn't frantic with fear or heavy with malice. "Sir," the driver whispered, his voice tight. "The next turn leads to the industrial docks. We can handle it there." Jae-Hyun didn't look up. He traced the lines of weariness etched around Zariah's closed eyes. She looked like a soldier returned from a war no one else was fighting. He thought of his own world, where every interaction was a transaction and every smile was a mask. Here was a woman who had given everything to her day, leaving nothing left for self-preservation. "No," Jae-Hyun said, his voice a low, melodic friction that barely carried to the front. She gave an address. 5th and Main. "Take her there." The driver blanched but obeyed, steering the heavy vehicle through the rain-slicked labyrinth of the city. For 15 minutes, the Ghost King sat in the shadows of his own empire, serving as a pillar for a nurse who didn't even know his name. He watched the city lights blur across the window, reflecting off the green of her scrubs. He found himself cataloging the small details, the ink stain on her pocket, the way her hand clutched the strap of her pink backpack even in sleep. When the car finally rolled to a stop outside a weathered apartment complex, Jae-Hyun didn't wake her immediately. He let the silence linger for one more minute, a brief reprieve from the darkness waiting for him at his own destination. Finally, he reached out, his gloved fingers hovering near her shoulder before gently shaking her. "Zariah," he murmured, using the name from her ID badge. "You're home." The fixer arrived at Zariah's apartment complex just as the sun began to bleed a bruised purple over the horizon. His name was Min-ho, and he was a man designed to be forgotten, nondescript suit, a face that blended into any crowd, and a heavy envelope tucked into his inner pocket. His instructions from Jae-Hyun were clear: ensure the woman's silence with a life-changing sum of money and walk away. Min-ho found the building's hallway smelling of floor wax and old cooking spices. He reached Zariah's door, but before he could knock, a muffled cry from the unit directly across the hall stopped him. He heard the unmistakable thud of a body hitting the floor, followed by the frantic, high-pitched barking of a small dog. The door to Zariah's apartment flew open. She wasn't wearing her scrubs anymore, but a faded oversized t-shirt and gray sweatpants. Her hair was a messy halo of curls, and her eyes were wide with a different kind of exhaustion, the kind that vanishes when adrenaline takes over. She didn't even glance at the strange man standing in the hallway. She lunged toward the neighbor's open door. "Mr. Henderson," she called out, her voice sharp and commanding. Min-ho hesitated, his hand hovering over his concealed weapon, before curiosity drew him to the threshold. Inside the cramped, lace-covered apartment, an elderly man lay sprawled on the carpet, his face a terrifying shade of blue-gray. Zariah was already on her knees beside him. "He's in cardiac arrest," she snapped, not looking back. "You! In the suit! Call 911. Now!" Min-ho, a man who had watched people bleed out in shipping containers without blinking, found himself pulling out his phone. He watched, mesmerized, as Zariah began chest compressions. The rhythmic thump-thump of her hands against the man's stomach was violent and methodical. She was sweating, her breath coming in jagged gasps, but her focus was unbreakable. "Stay with me, Arthur," she whispered between counts. "Don't you dare leave yet." For 10 minutes, Min-ho stood there, the envelope of hush money forgotten in his hand. He watched Zariah fight a war in a tiny village, her small frame channeling a strength that seemed impossible. When the paramedics finally nursed him, she didn't stop until they had the weapons on his chest. As they loaded the elderly man onto a stretcher, Zariah slumped against the floral wallpaper, trembling. Only then did she notice Min-ho still standing there. She wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of dust. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice raspy. Min-ho looked at the envelope. He thought of the Ghost King, waiting for a report on the nurse's greed or fear. He tucked the money back into his pocket. This woman couldn't be bought, because she was already occupied by a spirit that didn't recognize the currency of the underworld. "I'm a representative of Mr. Park," Min-ho said, his tone shifting to something almost respectful. "He realized you left your umbrella in the car. But I think I'll tell him you were busy saving the world instead." A week passed before the black sedan returned, but this time it didn't wait in the rain. It sat prominently at the hospital's main entrance in the midday sun, its polished surface reflecting the glass towers of the city. When Zariah emerged from her shift, her pink backpack slung over one shoulder, she found Min-ho holding the door open. There was no envelope this time, only a silent invitation. The drive led away from her working-class neighborhood and toward the logistics district, a forest of steel and silver where Park Logistics dominated the skyline. The penthouse floor of the headquarters was a masterpiece of cold minimalism, marble floors, floor-to-ceiling glass, and a silence so heavy it felt pressurized. Jae-Hyun stood by the window, his back to the door. He wore a charcoal suit that looked like armor, his posture as still as a statue. When he turned, his sharp jawline and observant eyes seemed to catalog every detail of Zariah's appearance, from her tired eyes to the way she gripped her bag. "Mr. Henderson is stable," he said, his voice smooth and devoid of its usual frost. "Minho told me what you did. It seems my assessment was correct. You don't just work as a nurse, you are one." "Why am I here, Mr. Park?" Zariah asked, her voice soft but steady. "If this is about the ride, I think we've settled that." "I have a problem, Zariah," he said, walking toward a hidden door set into the mahogany paneling. He pressed his thumb to a scanner, and the wall glided open to reveal a state-of-the-art medical suite. It was cleaner and better equipped than the ER she had just left, but it lacked a soul. "My associates often find themselves in situations where public hospitals are inconvenient. My current staff is technically proficient, but they lack the discretion and the heart required to handle the men who keep this city running." Zariah stepped into the room, her fingers brushing the cold stainless steel of a surgical table. "You want me to run a shadow clinic for the underground? I want you to provide the same care you gave that man in the hallway to people the rest of the world has discarded," Jae-Hyun corrected, stepping closer until she could smell the cedar and spice of his cologne. "There are men in my organization who have families, who have stories, and who are currently dying in basements because they are afraid of a police report. I am offering you the resources to save them. All of them." Zariah looked at him, searching for a lie in his dark, impenetrable eyes. She saw the Ghost King, but she also saw a man who was deeply, quietly isolated by his own power. "I won't compromise my ethics," she whispered. "I save everyone. No questions, no judgments." "That," Jae-Hyun said, a rare, dangerous ghost of a smile touching his lips, "is exactly why I chose you." The transition from the public ER to the Ghost King's private infirmary felt like stepping into a different dimension. The air was colder, the equipment was newer, and the patients were far more silent. Zariah's first case wasn't a stranger, it was Jae-Hyun's top lieutenant, a man named Daeshim, who had been brought in with a jagged laceration across his torso that no civilian doctor would believe came from a household accident. Zariah moved with a rhythmic, practiced grace, her green scrubs a sharp contrast to the dark, industrial aesthetic of the room. She didn't flinch at the sight of the wound or the cold, obsidian eyes of the men standing guard at the door. As she prepared the local anesthetic, she felt a presence behind her. She didn't need to turn to know it was Jae-Hyun. "He's lost a lot of blood," Zariah said, her voice steady as she began the first stitch. "But the muscle is intact. He'll be back on his feet in a week, provided he actually rests." "He doesn't know how to rest," Jae-Hyun remarked from the shadows. He watched her hands, small, sure, and untrembling. "He thinks his value is measured only in the strikes he takes for the company." Zariah paused, her needle hovering. She looked at the lieutenant, who was gritting his teeth in silent agony. "He's a person, Jae-Hyun. Not a line item in your logistics ledger. He has a mother in Busan he sends money to every month. I saw the folded photo in his wallet when we moved his things." Jae-Hyun went still. He had known Daeshim for 10 years, yet he had never looked at his wallet. He had never considered the why behind the loyalty, only the how of the execution. Zariah's empathy wasn't just a trait, it was a flashlight, illuminating the humanity he had spent a decade trying to ignore. "You see too much," he murmured, stepping closer into the light of the surgical lamp. "I see what's there," Zariah countered, tying off the suture with a crisp snip. "You've built an empire on silence, but silence doesn't heal anyone. It just hides the scars." As she cleaned the wound, her fingers accidentally brushed against Jae-Hyun's hand. For a split second, the professional distance vanished. She saw the flicker of something raw in his eyes, a hunger for the very sincerity she represented. In that moment, the clinic stopped being a job and started being a bridge. Zariah realized that while she was stitching up his men, she was inadvertently beginning to pull at the threads of the armor Jae-Hyun wore so tightly. The transformation was jarring. Zariah stood before a full-length mirror in the penthouse suite, barely recognizing the woman looking back. The green scrubs had been replaced by a floor-length silk gown the color of midnight, its deep hue making her warm skin glow. Jae-Hyun had insisted she accompany him to the Global Logistics Gala, not as a nurse, but as his personal consultant. "You look uncomfortable," a voice drifted from the doorway. Jae-Hyun stood there, the epitome of the logistics titan. His black suit was tailored with lethal precision, and his eyes were as cold and clear as diamonds. He looked every bit the man who could move mountains or crush lives with a single phone call. "I feel like I'm wearing a costume," Zariah admitted, fidgeting with the delicate silver necklace he had sent to her room. "In the ER, I know exactly who I am. Here, I don't even know where to put my hands." "Then watch me," Jae-Hyun said, stepping into the room. He reached out, his fingers steadying her trembling hands. "Tonight, I am a CEO. I am a strategist. I am a man who has never seen a drop of blood in his life. That is the mask I wear to keep this world turning." At the gala, Zariah watched the performance unfold. Jae-Hyun moved through the crowd of billionaires and politicians with a terrifying grace. He was charming yet distant, speaking softly but commanding instant silence. He shook hands with men Zariah knew were corrupt, his face a mask of polite indifference. To the world, he was the untouchable king of industry. To her, he was the man who had sat in a silent car for 15 minutes just to let her sleep. As they stood on the balcony overlooking the city, away from the clinking of champagne flutes, Zariah saw the mask slip. The tension in his jaw remained, a permanent fixture of a man who could never truly relax. "It's a heavy crown, isn't it?" she asked softly, leaning against the cold stone railing. Jae-Hyun didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the glowing grid of the city below. "It's a cage, Zariah. One built of gold and iron. Most people only see the gold. They don't see that the occupant is just as trapped as the prisoner in the basement. You don't have to be," she whispered, her empathy reaching out for him despite the danger of his world. He finally turned to her, and for a fleeting second, the Ghost King was gone. In his eyes was the lonely weight of a decade of silence. He reached out, his thumb grazing her jawline, but before he could speak, his phone vibrated, a sharp, insistent intrusion of the reality they both served. The mask snapped back into place instantly. The moment was over, but the crack in his armor had never been wider. The transition from the elegance of the gala to the brutality of the streets happened in a heartbeat. It was a Tuesday night, the kind of quiet evening that usually signaled a lull in the ER, when the emergency silent alarm in Zariah's apartment began to pulse a low, rhythmic red. She didn't wait for a phone call. She grabbed her medical kit and ran to the logistics HQ, but she didn't find the sterile, controlled environment she had grown used to. Instead, she found the underground garage smelling of burnt rubber and copper. A black sedan, its side riddled with glass-shattered craters, sat idling near the private elevator. "Zariah." Minho's voice was frantic, a sound she had never heard from the stoic fixer. He was hauling a slumped figure toward the infirmary doors. It was Jae-Hyun. His charcoal suit was soaked through, the fabric clinging to his torso in a way that made Zariah's stomach drop. He wasn't the CEO now, he was a man losing his life to a silent, invisible enemy. As they got him onto the surgical table, Zariah's hands moved before her brain could even process the fear. She sliced through the expensive silk of his shirt, revealing not a bullet wound, but a series of strange, darkening veins radiating from a small puncture in his shoulder. "It wasn't a hit," Jae-Hyun rasped, his eyes fluttering as he struggled to maintain consciousness. His skin was clammy, his pulse thready and skipping beats. A needle, in the crowd, at the exit. Zariah's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't a trauma she could stitch, it was a toxin. She leaned close, her nose inches from the wound. There was a faint, bitter scent, like crushed almonds and wilted roses. "Aconite," she whispered, her mind racing back to a specialized toxicology seminar she'd taken after her brother's death. "It's a slow-acting neurotoxin. He's going into respiratory failure." The men in the room shifted, their hands moving toward their holsters as if they could shoot the poison out of his blood. "Fix it," Minho commanded, his voice trembling. "I need an atropine drip and a gastric lavage kit," Zariah snapped, the ER nurse taking full command. She looked down at Jae-Hyun, whose grip on her hand was tightening with a desperate, dying strength. "Stay with me, Jae-Hyun. Look at me. Don't look at the lights, look at me." For the next 4 hours, the Ghost King's empire held its breath. Zariah worked in a fevered dream of adrenaline, monitoring his erratic heart rate and flushing the toxin from his system. Every time his monitor flatlined, she felt a piece of her own soul fracture. This was the moment she realized her harmful empathy had evolved into something far more dangerous. She wasn't just saving a patient, she was fighting for the man who had seen her soul in the back of a car. When his heart finally settled into a steady, rhythmic thrum, Zariah collapsed into the chair beside him, her hands finally shaking. Jae-Hyun's eyes opened, clouded but present. He didn't look at his men or his monitors. He only looked at the nurse in the blood-stained gown who had pulled him back from the edge of the dark. The sterile safety of the high-rise clinic was gone. By midnight, the air in the headquarters had turned toxic with the scent of betrayal. The silent alarm hadn't just been a medical emergency, it was the signal for a coup. Minho and a handful of loyalists had moved a barely conscious Jae-Hyun through a freight elevator and into a nondescript van, with Zariah refusing to leave his side, her hands still stained with the chemicals of his survival. They drove in a haunting silence, bypassing the city's glowing arteries for the shadowed outskirts. They finally pulled up to a small, weathered house tucked behind a screen of overgrown pines. It was a modest structure of brick and faded wood, a far cry from the glass towers of the logistics district. "Where are we?" Zariah whispered, helping Minho shoulder Jae-Hyun's weight as they moved toward the porch. "His childhood home," Minho replied, his eyes scanning the tree line. "The only property not listed on the company books. Even the board doesn't know this place exists." Inside, the house smelled of dust and old paper. It was a time capsule of a life Jae-Hyun had long since buried. Zariah cleared a kitchen table, transforming the wooden surface into a makeshift infirmary. She worked by the light of a single battery-powered lamp, her focus narrowed to the man fighting for breath. Throughout the night, the roles of king and nurse dissolved. In his delirium, Jae-Hyun didn't speak of logistics or power. He murmured names of people long gone and reached for Zariah's hand as if it were his only anchor to the world. She sat on a creaky wooden chair, cooling his fever with a damp cloth, her own exhaustion forgotten. "You should sleep," Minho said, standing guard by the window. "The toxin is neutralized. He's stable." "I can't," Zariah replied, her voice thick with emotion. She looked at Jae-Hyun's pale face, stripped of its calculated mask. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the crowd at that gala. I see how easy it was for someone to almost take him away." She realized then that the safe house wasn't just a place to hide his body, it was where he kept his humanity. Surrounded by the simple furniture and old photographs of his youth, the Ghost King looked vulnerable. Zariah leaned forward, resting her forehead against his hand. She had spent her life trying to heal the wounds of the city, but here, in the quiet of a forgotten home, she realized she was trying to heal a heart that had been broken long before she ever stepped into his car. The storm had passed, leaving the air inside the childhood home thick and heavy. As Jae-Hyun's fever broke, Zariah began to tidy the small living room, moving his discarded suit jacket to find a place for her medical kit. A thick, leather-bound ledger fell from the inner pocket, splaying open on the floor. Zariah reached down to retrieve it, but her breath hitched as her eyes landed on a series of acquisition reports from 3 years ago. There, highlighted in clinical black ink, was the name of the regional hospital where her younger brother had died, and the logistics restructuring plan that had led to the fatal understaffing on that exact night. "You bought it," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "The company that cut the staff. The company that decided my brother's life wasn't worth the overhead cost." Jae-Hyun stirred, his eyes opening to find Zariah standing over him, the ledger trembling in her hands. The silence that followed was more suffocating than the toxin had been. He didn't offer a lie. He didn't even try to look away. "It was a hostile takeover," he said, his voice raw. "I saw the numbers, not the names. I saw a failing asset to be stripped and rebuilt. I didn't know about your brother, Zariah. Not until I saw your file." "But you knew what happened there," she countered, tears finally spilling over. "You knew people were dying in the margins of your spreadsheets, and you didn't stop it because it was good business. I spent years trying to heal the damage you calculated." She looked at him, the man she had saved, the man who had sat in the rain just to let her sleep, and saw the monster the city feared. The betrayal felt like a physical weight, a jagged glass shard in her chest. She had been stitching up the man who had indirectly torn her world apart. "Zariah," he reached out, his hands shaking, "I can't change the past. But I have spent every day since I met you trying to be the man who deserves to sit in the back of that car with you." "Is that why you gave me the clinic?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Atonement? Or just another way to keep me close so I wouldn't look too deep?" "In the beginning? Perhaps," Jae-Hyun admitted, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. "But now? I'd burn every ledger I own just to make sure you never have to cry again. Choose, Zariah. You can leave, and I will ensure you are safe forever. Or stay, and help me tear it all down." Zariah looked at the ledger, then at the man. She thought of her brother's face, and then she thought of the way Jae-Hyun had looked at her in the dark of the sedan. She was a healer, and for the first time, she realized that some wounds required a total destruction of the old self to truly mend. The ledger lay on the floor between them, a heavy symbol of the lives traded for profit. Outside the childhood home, the rain had finally slowed to a rhythmic drip, echoing the steady beat of the heart Zariah had worked so hard to save. She looked at Jae-Hyun, not as the Ghost King or the logistics titan, but as a man standing at a precipice. "My brother didn't die for your bottom line," Zariah said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "He died because people like you forgot that efficiency has a human cost." Jae-Hyun stood up, his movements slow and pained. He didn't approach her, he respected the distance her grief had placed between them. "I cannot bring him back, Zariah. But I can ensure that the machine that killed him never runs again. I have already begun the process. By sunrise, Park Logistics will cease to exist as a syndicate. I am liquidating the assets, turning the gray market accounts into an endowment." "And the men?" Zariah asked. "The ones who rely on the silence. They will have a choice," Jae-Hyun said, stepping toward the window. "Follow me into the light, or find a new master. I am walking away. I am taking the logistics, the real infrastructure of this city, and I am handing the keys to you." He turned to her, and the morning light caught the sincerity he had buried decades ago. "I want to build a trauma network that covers every neighborhood the city ignored. No more private clinics in basements. No more understaffed hospitals. We use my reach to heal the very streets I helped bruise." Zariah looked at him, searching for the ghost. He was gone. In his place was a man offering his entire empire as an act of penance. Her flaw had always been a harmful empathy, a need to heal things that were broken, but she realized now that Jae-Hyun wasn't a monster to be feared, he was a man who needed to be led home. "It won't be easy," she warned, wiping the last of the tears from her face. "The board won't let you just walk away. The rivals will still look for us." "Let them look," Jae-Hyun said, finally crossing the room to take her hand. His grip was warm, solid, and for the first time, peaceful. "They won't find a king. They'll find a man who finally knows what it's like to sleep through the night because he has someone worth waking up for." Zariah leaned her head against his shoulder, the same way she had in the back of the sedan. The wrong ride had led her exactly where she needed to be. They walked out of the house together, leaving the shadows of the past behind, ready to build a world where compassion was the only law that mattered.